introduced and expanded communism and socialism within America and inducted Americans unwittingly into the service of these causes. Title 50, Chapter 23, Subchapter 4, Section 841, Findings and Declarations of Fact. The Congress finds and declares that the Communist Party of the United States consists of the IRS, the DOJ, and a corrupted federal judiciary. Although purportedly a political party, is in fact an instrumentality of a conspiracy to overthrow the de jure government of the United States and replace it with a de facto government ruled by the judiciary. It constitutes an authoritarian dictatorship. The IRS, DOJ, and corrupted Fed judiciary is in collusion within a constitutional republic, demanding for itself the rights and privileges, including immunities from prosecution for their wrongdoing in violations of Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8 of the Constitution according to the political parties, but denying to all others the liberties, Bill of Rights guaranteed by the United States. Unlike political parties, which involve their policies and programs through public means, by the reconciliation of a wide variety of individual views and submit those policies and programs to the elaborate at large for approval or disapproval, the policies and programs of the Communist Party are secretly by corrupt judges and the IRS in completely disregard of the tax laws prescribed for it by the foreign leaders of the world communist movement, the IRS and the Fed Reserve. Its members, the Congress, which was terrorized to do IRS bidding recently by the framing of the Congressman James Traficant, have no part in determining its goals and are not permitted to voice dissent to party objectives. Unlike members of political parties, members of the Communist Party are recruited for indoctrination in the public schools by homosexuals, liberals, and socialists with respect to its objectives and methods, and are organized and instructed and disciplined by the IRS and a corrupted judiciary to carry on into action slavishly the assignments given them by their hierarchical chief chains. Unlike political parties, the Communist Party, thanks to a corrupted Fed judiciary, acknowledges no constitutional or statutory limitations upon its conduct or upon that of its members. The Communist Party is relatively small numerically and gives scant indication of capacity ever to attain its end or lawful policies. Political means. The peril inherent in its operation arises not from its numbers, but from the failure to acknowledge any limitation as to the nature of its activities and its dedication to the proposition that the present constitutional government of the United States ultimately must be brought to ruin by any available means, including resort to force and violence for using income taxes, holding that doctrine, its role as the agency of a hostile foreign power, the Fed Reserve, and the American Bar Association, renders its existence a clear, present, and continuing danger in the security of the United States. It is the means whereby individuals are seduced into the service of the world communist movement, trained to do its bidding, and directed and controlled in the conspiratorial performance of the revolutionary service. Therefore, the Communist Party should be outlawed. Yeah, that's why TikTok hasn't been banned. Yeah, makes sense now. Created the administrative state, whereby Fed agencies are empowered to directly and unconstitutionally supervise the activities of otherwise private citizens and enforce Fed statutory law against them. This sort of intrusion is repugnant to the Constitution. The power to legislate generally upon life, liberty, and property, as opposed to the power to provide modes of redress against offensive state action, was repugnant to the Constitution. Although the specific holdings of these early cases might have been superseded or modified, their treatment of Congress power as corrective or privative, not definitional, has not been questioned. Caused a destruction of sovereign immunity and rights of persons domiciled in states of the Union that brings them under the control of the foreign law system that makes up the U.S. Code. C 28 U.S. Code 1605. If men, through fear, fraud, or mistake, should in terms renounce or give up any natural right, the eternal law of reason and the grand end of society would absolutely vacate such renunciation. The right to freedom being a gift of Almighty Lord, it is not in the power of man to alienate this gift and voluntarily become a slave. Invaded the exclusive sovereignty of families and churches over charitable causes. Only churches and families can lawfully engage in charitable causes. The U.S. Supreme Court has said that the government may not use the power to tax to compel anyone to subsidize benefits, whether charitable or not, to the public at large. Men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to secure, not grant or create these rights, governments are instituted. That property or income which a man has honestly acquired, he retains full control of, subject to three limitations. First, that he shall not use it into his neighbor's injury, and that does not mean that he must use it for his neighbor's benefit. Social Security, Medicare, and other public benefit. Second, that if he devotes it to a public use, he gives to the public a right to control that use. And third, that whenever the public needs require, the public may take it upon payment of due compensation. To lay with one hand the power of the government on the property of the citizen and with the other and to bestow it upon favored individuals to aid private enterprises and build up private fortunes is nonetheless a robbery because it is done under the forms of law and it's called taxation. This is not legislation, it is decree upon under legislative forms. Nor is it taxation. A tax, says Webster's Dictionary, it is a rate or sum of money assessed on the person or property of a citizen by government for the use of the nation or state. Taxes are burdens or charges imposed by the legislature upon persons or property to raise money for public purposes. I think the common mind has everywhere taken in the understanding that taxes are a public imposition levied by authority of the government for the purpose of carrying on the government and all its machineries and operations, that they are imposed for a public purpose. Warning: participating in any Gov franchise, your all caps letter name, can leave you entirely without standing or remedy in any Fed court. Essentially, by eating out of the government's hand, you are screwed, black and blued, and tattooed. Below is the first rule of what the U.S. Supreme calls the Brandeis Rule. These general rules are well settled that the United States, when it creates rights in individuals against itself, a public right, which is the infamy for a franchise to help the court disguise the nature of the transaction, it is under no obligation to provide a remedy through the courts. That, where a statute creates a right and provides a special remedy, that remedy is exclusive. Still, the fact that the right and the remedy are thus intertwined might not, if the provision stood alone, require a U.S. to hold that the remedy expressly given excludes the right of review by the Court of Claims, where the decision of the special tribunal involved no disputed question of fact, and the law denial of compensation was rested wholly upon the construction of the act. Yeah, you can't get compensated. For a detailed exposition of why the above is true, see also Allen versus Graham. Signing up for government entitlement hands them essentially a blank check because they and not you determine the cost of the service and how much you will pay for it beyond that point. This makes the public servant into your master, and beyond that point, you must lick the hands that feed you. Watch out, never ever take a handout from the gov of any kind, or you'll end up being their cheap whore. The Bible calls this whore Babylon the Great Harlot. Remember, Black's Law's Dictionary defines commerce, e.g., commerce with the government, as intercourse. Commerce, intercourse by way of trade and traffic between different peoples, estates, and the citizens or inhabitants thereof, including not only the purchase, sale, and exchange of commodities, but also the instrumentalities, governments, and agencies by which it is promoted, and the means and appliances by which it is carried on. Gov franchises and licenses are the main method of destroying the sovereignty of the people, pursuant to 28 U.S. Code 1603b3 and 28 U.S. Code 1605a2. They are also the main method that our public servants abuse to escape the straitjacket limits of the Constitution. Below is an admission by the U.S. Supreme Court of this fact in relation to Social Security. We must conclude that a person covered by the Act has not such a right to benefit payments. This is not to say, however, that Congress may exercise its power to modify the statutory scheme free of all constitutional restraints. Those who exercise the right to contract in procuring a franchise become residents of the forum or jurisdiction where the other party to the franchise agreement resides, or where the agreement itself specifies. In the context of the Internal Revenue Code, Subtitle A, Trade or Business Franchise Agreement, the agreement itself in 26 U.S. Code 7701, 839, and 748D specifies where the parties to the agreement must litigate all disputes. That place is the District of Columbia for all persons who have no domicile in the District of Columbia because they are either domiciled in a foreign country or a state of the Union. Finally, if you would like an excellent secular version of this section and video forum for the famous freedom personalities, see The Fall of Rome and Modern Parallels video on YouTube. Franchises are a main method by which democracies become corrupted, turn socialist, and become de facto rather than de jure. The design for our system of government came from Charles de Montesquieu, in his seminal treatise entitled The Spirit of the Laws. The founding fathers used this book more often than any of the other in the drafting of the Constitution. Alright, it was Charles who first invented the idea of a republican government based on three branches, which is what we have, and we're the first country to implement his plan. He wrote his book in 1752, and the USA was first to implement it in 1789. In this book, Charles predicted the very corruption personified in any kind of benefit or franchise that would cause people to sell their vote to get more state favors. He talked about how franchises would extinguish what they call the spirit of equality. That is the foundation of the Constitution, and replace it with privilege, hypocrisy, injustice, and corruption on the scale we have now. His predictions are coming true in spades, both with the original Social Security Act of 1935, the Fed income tax, and with other socialist programs such as Medicare, unemployment insurance, etc. The corruption, Charles said, would come from the benefits and privileges and the flow of money that would corrupt the voters and cause the indolent to sanction the government through their vote to steal from the rich and give to the poor. This prediction is precisely the same prediction that the U.S. Supreme Court made in the Pollock case in 1895 after the first income tax. That income tax and every other type of franchise tax would pit the poor against the rich in a battle of class warfare, using the voting booth as the battlefield. The principle of democracy is corrupted, not only when the spirit of equality is extinct because of franchises, but likewise when they fall into a spirit of extreme equality, and when each citizen would fain be upon a level with those whom he has chosen to command him. Then the people, incapable of bearing the very power they have delegated, want to manage everything else themselves, to debate for the Senate, to execute for the magistrate, and to decide for the judges. When this is the case, virtue can no longer subsist in the republic. The people are desirous of exercising the functions of the magistrate who cease to be revered. The deliberation of the Senate are slighted. All respect is then laid aside for the senators and consequently for old age. If there is no more respect for old age, there will be none respectfully for parents. Deference to husbands will be likewise thrown off and submission to masters. This license will soon become general, and the trouble of command be as fatiguing as that of obedience. Wives, children, slaves will shake off all subjection. No longer will there be any such thing as manners, order, or virtue. We find in Siphon's very likely description of a republic in which the people abuse their equality. Each guest gives in his turn the reason why he is satisfied. Content I am, says Shamiz, because of my poverty. When I was rich, I was obligated to pay my court to informs, knowing I was more liable to be hurt by them than capable of doing them harm. The Republic constantly demands some new tax of me, and I could not decline paying. Since I have grown poor, I have acquired authority. Nobody threatens me. I rather threaten others. I can go or stay where I please. The rich already rise from their seats and give me the way. I am a king. I was before a slave. I paid taxes to the Republic. Now it maintains, pays benefits to me. I am no longer afraid of losing, but I hope to acquire. The people fall into the misfortunes when those in whom they confide, desirous of concealing their own corruption, endeavor to corrupt them. To disguise their own ambition, they speak to them only of the grandeur of the state. To conceal their own avarice, they incessantly flatter theirs. The corruption will increase among the corruptors, and likewise among those who are already corrupted. The people will divide the public money among themselves to pay benefits, and having added the administration of affairs to their indulgence, will be for blending their poverty with the amusements of luxury. But with their indulgence in luxury, nothing but the public treasure benefit will be able to satisfy their demands. We must not be surprised to see their suffragists votes at the ballot box given for money, government benefits under a franchise. It is impossible to make great largesses to the people without great extortion. And to compass this, the state must be subverted. The greater the advantages they seem to derive from their liberty, the nearer they approach towards the critical money of losing it. Petty tyrants arise, who have all of the vices of a single tyrant. The small remains of liberty soon become insupportable. A single tyrant starts up, and the people are stripped of everything, even of the profits of their corruption. All right, 11 more minutes. Charles states that the franchises and the benefits that implement and pay for them will subvert the state. What he means is that it will undermine the sovereignty of the state, which is we the people in this country, by destroying their sovereignty and making them the prey of greedy judges and lawyers with a conflict of interest who are more interested in expanding their paycheck and their importance than in the advancing the purpose of law, which is to protect your private rights by keeping them from being converted to public rights and franchises without your consent. A subverted state is called a de facto state. The methods by which a de jure state is converted into a de facto state are exhaustively described in the following document. Frenchman Alexis, in his famous work Democracy in America, alluded the same weakness of democracy as Charles did above. His work is frequently quoted by no less than the U.S. Supreme Court. The physical gratifications he speaks of are the material pleasures bestowed by a generous socialist government intent on bribing voters. He says that the chief business of America is to remain their own masters, meaning to not surrender their rights for the benefits of a socialist franchise. There is indeed a most dangerous passage in the history of a democratic people, when the taste for physical gratification among them has grown more rapidly than their education and their experience of free institutions. The time will come when men are carried away and lose all self-restraint at the sight of the new possessions they are about to obtain. In their intense and exclusive anxiety to make a fortune, they lose sight of the close connection that exists between the private fortune of each and the prosperity of it all. It is not necessarily to do violence to people in order to strip them from the rights they enjoy. They themselves willingly loosen their hold. The discharge of political duties appears to them to be a troublesome impediment which diverts them from their occupations of business. If they are required to elect the representatives to support the government by personal service to meet on public business, they think they have no time. They cannot waste their precious hours in useless engagements. Such idle amusements are unsuited to serious men who are engaged with the more important interests of life. These people think they are following the principles of self-interest, but the idea they entertain of that principle is a very crude one, and the better to look after what they call their own business, they neglect their chief business, which is to remain their own masters. Yeah, that part. As the citizens who labor do not care to attend to public affairs, and as the class which might devote its leisure to these duties has created ceased to exist, the place of the government is as it never unfilled. If at that critical moment some able and ambitious man grasps the supreme power, he will find the road to every kind of usurious open before him. If he attends for some time only to the material prosperity of the country, no more will be demanded of him. Above all, he must ensure public tranquility. Men who are possessed by the passion for physical gratification generally find out that the turmoil of freedom disturbs their welfare checks before they discover how freedom itself serves to promote it. If the slightest rumor of public commotion intrudes into the petty pleasures of private life, they are aroused and alarmed by it. The fear of anarchy perpetually haunts them, and they are always ready to fling away their freedom at the first disturbance. I readily admit that public tranquility is a great good, but at the same time I cannot forget that all nations have been enslaved by being kept in good order. Certainly it is not to be inferred that nations ought to despise public tranquility, but that state ought not to content them. A nation that asks nothing of its government but the maintenance of order is already a slave at heart, the slave of its own well-being, awaiting only the hand that will bind it. By such a nation, the disposition of faction is not less to be dreaded than the disposition of an individual. When the bulk of the community are engrossed by private concerns, the smallest parties need not despair of getting the upper hand in public affairs. At such time, it is not rare to see on the great stage of the world, as we see our theaters, a multitude represented by a few players who alone speak in the name of an absent or unattentive crowd. They alone are in action, while all others are stationary. They regulate everything by their own caprice. They change the laws and tyrannize all at will over the manners of the country. And then men wonder to see into how small a number of weak and worthless hands a great people may fall. That part. 5 more minutes. I have shown how the dread of disturbance and the love of well-being insensibly lead democratic nations to increase the functions of central government socialism as the only power which appears to be instinctively sufficiently strong, enlightened, and secure to protect them from anarchy. I would now add that all the particular circumstances which tend to make the state of a democratic community agitated and precarious enhances this general propensity and lead private persons more and more to sacrifice their rights to their tranquility. A people is therefore never so disposed to increase the functions of central government as at the close of a long and bloody revolution, which after having wrested property from the hands of its former possessors, has shaken all belief and filled the nation with fierce hatreds, conflicting interests, and contending factions. The love of public tranquility becomes at such times an indiscriminate passion, and the members of the community are apt to conceive a most inordinate devotion to order. What Alexis is describing is what we call the tyranny of necessity, where the government has robbed everyone of their substance and they are desperate in need of government check. The Bible describes this tyranny as follows and advises people to work instead of wait on government check or handout. All right, I'm